Okay, all set.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We're going to be getting started here in about 2 minutes, so please stay tuned for just a few moments. Thank you. My goodness, you must know it's early when you're that blurry in the morning. There we go. We'll try and get it figured out here, but my camera is not as important as the others. We will be getting started here in just a moment. Welcoming you all this morning to the first SIG updates. So bear with us just a moment and we'll get started here shortly. Thank you. All right, I think camera issues have been fixed. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today. This is, I believe, the third installment of our SIG update, our annual event to find out all the neat work that our SIGs are doing. My name is Sean Richardson. I am one of the board members and also the liaison to all the SIGs. And so I'm very excited to get to come and moderate today. For me, I think this work the SIGs do is really an important part of what FIRST does. It gives people the opportunity to come together and work on industry kind of issues and discuss topics. You know, we come up with standards and white papers and trainings and ideas of how to make things more secure, how to make our processes better, how to reach out to the community and all sorts of things. And I think it's just incredible that we support this, that we provide resources for folks who have ideas for new special interest groups. So if you have an idea, do reach out. We'd love to hear it. Want to remind everybody that we do have our annual conference coming up. It's going to be virtual this year. It is going to be June 6th through the 9th. Please go out to first.org if you have interest in joining us. It should be a great conference. With that, I want to go ahead and introduce our first up this morning. We're going to be hearing from the chairs for the DNS Abuse SIG. And with that, folks, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Sean. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, you're good to go.
Okay, then welcome everyone. I'm Michael Housting. I work for Switch, and together with Jonathan, I'm co-sharing the DNS Abuse SIG. And together with John Todd, who is an expert in recursive DNS and all kinds of DNS stuff, we're going to give you an update about the DNS Abuse SIG, what we've done so far, what we're discussing, and what are our next steps. So what is the DNS Abuse SIG about? DNS abuse is a topic that has been discussed in the policy sphere. And we said that incident responders are confronted with reports of abuse every day. And large part of these reports contain domain names and are related to the DNS. And this is why we drafted this mission of the DNS Abuse SIG that I'm not going to read out loud, but you can read it yourself. Our goal is to understand what are the policies and what are the norms that certs can act and can detect and mitigate abuse on the DNS level. But Jonathan will tell you more about what we're doing and how we try to do that.
Thank you, Michael. Greetings, everyone, wherever you are, morning, afternoon, or evening. I'm going to speak briefly about the SIG's goals and deliverables. Our goal is to provide a common language and definition from the perspective of the global incident response community of what DNS abuse means. that's consistent with the everyday operational context of responders to successfully protect our constituencies. The SIG wants its voice to be heard in global policy discussions. Incident responders work with classification schemes to quickly analyze an incident and effectively mitigate abuse. DNS abuse has to make sense within such a classification scheme. Incident responders also recover from incidents by always seeking to improve their understanding of threat actor tools, techniques, and procedures, TTPs. The only way to protect constituencies and ultimately improve recovery from DNS abuse is to better understand these TTPs of DNS threat actors. There are many relevant stakeholders here. Cooperation has become increasingly important to make the internet a safer place. It cannot be done by any single player. Identifying relevant stakeholders, facilitating cooperation and situational awareness on how everyone may effectively work together is a necessary part of DNS abuse incident response planning. Mitigation best practices should be shared and practiced to facilitate reasonable cooperation in the time of an actual incident. Appropriate documentation to facilitate mitigation should be proactive so that it is more useful when an incident arises. Next slide. So there are some stakeholders in this ecosystem that have their own understanding of what DNS abuse means. But to some extent, desired outcomes in policymaking constrain how one interprets words such as DNS abuse. In 2018, the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network, which you can find more information online at internetjurisdiction.net, published their own domains and jurisdiction program with the goal of documenting operational approaches for DNS operators based on what they understand to be customary norms, appropriate criteria, and mechanisms. But that document defines DNS operators from a somewhat narrow perspective of registries in charge of TLDs, top-level domains, and retail registrars. This may be the case because the goal may have been to ensure ICANN documentation is interpreted in a way that works for those operators, but not necessarily taking into account the global incident response community or other technical operators that make up the broader DNS ecosystem. Roughly a year later, a dozen or so registry operators and registrars released a framework based on this somewhat narrow view of customary norms that is motivated by ensuring that ICANN documentation is interpreted to meet their specific interests, but does not necessarily take into account a view of the DNS ecosystem from the perspective of the global incident response community. The coalition has expanded, but only to close to maybe 50 registrars or registry operators, and it is not necessarily anchored in customary norms outside of their own constituency. This is by no means meant to criticize, but just to provide context. The framework was published online for those interested at dnsabuseframework.org. The most recent version you can see is cited to in the bottom of the slide. You can, if you want to copy and paste it later on. The framework is no doubt helpful as a contributing viewpoint to a broader discussion, but leaves out of the multi-stakeholder model the global incident response community in understanding DNS abuse, and begs the question whether it makes sense to even juxtapose DNS abuse with website content abuse just because that juxtaposition is popular in some ICANN powerful lobby groups. Our SIG has taken a different approach of adapting ANISA's reference incident classification taxonomy, published a few years ago with slight clarifications to visualize the relationship between DNS and the various classes of harmful cyber activity. We juxtapose abuse of the DNS with abuse via the DNS, and the nature of the abuse sometimes involving acquired resources versus intrusions, as well as how to mitigate, prevent, or recover through the DNS. With that, we can go to the next slide. So policy versus incident response and bridging the gap. Multi-stakeholder policy should take into account the global incident response community's everyday operations. We need a framework that is available to mitigate harmful cyber activity, and that has integrity so that it is reliable. The term DNS abuse is confusing because it is often defined by lobby groups with the goal of pushing an agenda at ICANN. The SIG wants our framework to be truthful to internet engineering architecture principles when defining DNS abuse. The SIG is also committed to the integrity of our taxonomy so that it can be used by the security community dealing with actual incidents that arise. The SIG also feels strongly that the full ecosystem has to include everything from registration to the resolvers and all the way to the application layer. In order to maintain relevance to all operators, our SIG has emphasized that the taxonomy must map threats and corresponding response behaviors by the global incident response community to policy intentions. And with that, we can turn it to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Michael.
I think actually this one's mine, Jonathan.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Exactly.
All right. It's all right. So as Jonathan said, we're trying to expand the list of stakeholders to include what represents the DNS infrastructure and ecosystem today. One of the first challenges we had was to actually come up with, as this is part of a taxonomy, come up with the definitions of abuse. And we came up with two very broad definitions that I think better encompass or at least allow us to define categories within DNS abuse. The first is abuse of the DNS, and this is what we tried to do. We tried to create a statement that allowed us to describe issues that surrounded the DNS itself, meaning abuse of the infrastructure. Again, I won't read this sentence out loud, but essentially we're looking at abuse of the DNS. There are some non-obvious components of the abuse of the DNS, such as certain types of registries, which are registrations, which may be abuse of the DNS, but sometimes they actually are both. Sometimes they are abuse of and abuse via. So next slide, please. Abuse via the DNS, there we go. So abuse via the DNS is actually a large component of this taxonomy. As we've discovered, the DNS is integral to a large number of other types of threats, but in and itself is actually part of the malicious activity. So we've defined another section which says abuse via the DNS, and this is any activity that occurs that requires the DNS in order to occur, but yet is not necessarily an abuse of the infrastructure itself in a technical way, meaning that it promulgates the abuse but is not abuse itself. Next slide, please. So with those two definitions of abuse of and abuse via, we started to come up with and created a spreadsheet that describes all of those different ENISA classifications. And then we additionally expanded it, trying to come up with both examples and with models of categories inside of each of those example sets. Would the DNS allow us or be able to allow us to classify things in these various columns? So is it possible to detect different types of threats with the DNS? Is it possible to mitigate these threats with the DNS and prevent? And then we came up with what we'll see here in a few moments is the difficult question of, well, that's going to be a challenging question to answer. Many of these different types of threats, the answer is sometimes. There are many categories where the DNS plays a role. As an example, it can be a mitigation practice, but it isn't necessarily a detection practice. So this spreadsheet that we've come up with, which is in our primary working document, is allowing us to capture and recategorize some of these things, especially in view of this changing nature of the DNS, where, as Jonathan mentioned, application developers are now also starting to be included in the DNS infrastructure and ecosystem as we see things like DOE coming out. So we need to include all the way out to the very edge, the stub resolver, and then even further up into the application layer, but then also including recursive resolvers, authoritative, and then the registry process and registrars. Then for each category also, we said the nature of the access, is this an acquired resource, an intrusion, or a denial? Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot or a clip of the spreadsheet taxonomy that we've been working on, and is a work in progress. You'll notice that in a lot of these cells we have sometimes, and this is, again, the DNS is so integral into so many of these different threats, and into the mitigation and management of so many of these threats, that we were not able to simply come up with a yes and no matrix. We had to actually come up with some a variable. This talks again, I think, to the importance of the DNS in so many of these different risk profile categories. And with that, there's also to the right of this, there's missing a stakeholder matrix, where we talked about who are the different stakeholders for each one of these different types of threats. Do they have a role to play? This hopefully will allow operators to better identify where they fall into the categorization process, and will allow policymakers to create policy that then addresses each one of these different types of threats, and allows operators to act based on that policy. So I think we're going to go into some examples next, and I'm going to pass it back to Michael.
Exactly. Thank you, Jonathan. So while this was about the work of the SIG, I'm going to give you 4 examples now and see how our mapping or our taxonomy can be applied to the everyday work of incident responders. We know that phishing is a big issue for most of incident responders, and we have seen that in other frameworks, phishing is classified as DNS abuse very simply, and they say, yes, phishing is DNS abuse. As incident responders, we have a different approach, and I'm going to show you now how is it defined. So as Jonathan already mentioned, a lot of the times we can give no clear answers if we are talking about a category of abuse. And this is why we have to answer the question if phishing is DNS abuse with a clear sometimes. And I'm now going to give you 4 examples to make that more clear and understandable. So the first one is the obvious thing. That is, a domain is registered and used for phishing against a certain target. This is a current case against a Swiss cantonal bank that is online for 3 days that we tried to take down. And you can see this is a website on a .com domain. It's called zkbbank.com. And the question now, how does this fit into our mapping and category? The definition of this one is a fraudulently registered domain that is currently exclusively being used to commit fraud under applicable law like phishing. The first question is it abuse of the DNS? And our answer there is no, it is not abuse of the DNS, because the DNS works as intended. Someone has registered a domain, they put up an authoritative name server, and the users or the victims that go to that website receive exactly the right answer. But it definitely is abuse via the DNS, because this website and this domain name is used to commit abuse. So here we see the difference between abuse of the DNS and via the DNS. And while this is the most common case of phishing, we'll see others where we answer these questions differently. Now, the next things we're going to categorize is, can it be detected via the DNS? And sure, if someone registers the domain name, you will see it in passive DNS, you will see it in zone files that are published. So there's the possibility to detect phishing attacks against a certain entity in the DNS. You can actually mitigate it in the DNS. That's what we have done in this case. So basically, we use a DNS firewall, and 5 minutes after we received the we verified the phishing page, we filtered the domain name for all our customers. And we also shared these domain name with other parties in Switzerland, as well with the anti-phishing working group and Fish Tank, so that others can use it to protect their customers. Can it be prevented? definitely. So if the registry or the registrar or the web hoster takes down the website, there's no more abuse possible over that website. Is it difficult to classify? The answer here is yes, and I have to explain that. For us as a Swiss entity, it was easy because we know the bank and we know that that domain name doesn't belong to them. For someone outside Switzerland, it might be quite hard to see a page from a bank they've never heard before, and then they should take it down. So I think that is something that is important to know, that the difficulty to classify and to verify an incident depends on your ability and also on the context you have. If, for example, if someone reports Chinese or a website in another language we can't read, it's quite hard to classify this as phishing. And our last indicator here is the nature of the access. And in this case, the nature of the access is acquired because we think that the threat actors have registered the domain and paid for it. This is example 1, and the next example looks similar if you look at the screenshot. It's a login page. That's also a phishing page that is currently online. It is phishing against a Swiss university, the EPFL in Lausanne. If you know the short name of the EPFL, it's easy to see that this is phishing, but for some others it might be difficult. So what is different here? Again, this is not abuse of the DNS because the DNS works as it should, but it is abuse via the DNS because the victims use the domain name. In this case, this is a web page from the government of the island of Cape Verdes to address the domain name of the phishing page. In this case, you cannot detect it easily with the DNS because the domain name already exists for a long time and the infrastructure itself has a legit use. So you can't say just because there's a domain name that is used by some of your users, there's abuse. But for sure, you can mitigate it. So you can as well block it with a DNS firewall. Here you have to think about, is it appropriate? We said for Switzerland, yes, it is appropriate because there are not so many users in Switzerland that would go to the webpage of the government of the Cape Verde. So we think the collateral damage is limited. But there are other cases, if you have compromised websites, where you carefully need to think if you really want to mitigate it on the DNS level and filter the whole domain name. Prevention here would also be possible, but yeah, the impact would be quite different than on a domain name that was just registered for phishing. Is it difficult to say that this is phishing? I think also yes. This is just a custom Zimbra login page, and the only hint that this actually is phishing is if you look at the URL that shows that this is somewhere under WordPress includes, and most likely this is a vulnerable version of WordPress and the attackers compromised the website. So our guess that the nature of the access for this case is an intrusion. So these are the most two common phishing techniques, but there are others, and the others are quite different if we look at the abuse of the DNS and via the DNS. So this is an example that actually, this is more than one example where we have phishing. And this time we have phishing against Netflix. So the adversaries want to get Netflix accounts. And how do they do this? They can send phishing emails, yes, but then you need to send a lot of emails, and there are more easy ways to do that. And that is by hijack DNS resolvers. There are multiple ways to do this. For example, in countries where you have a high usage of Google DNS, you can hijack a BGP route and just give answers as Google. And what we've seen here is that these rook resolvers will answer most of the queries correctly, but just for the target like Netflix or some banks or some other accounts that are valuable, they give wrong answers and get victims to their phishing page. So this is an example where we really have an abuse of the DNS, because if a victim queries a domain name, he will get a wrong answer, and that wrong answer will get him to the phishing page where the attackers try to get his credentials. Is it abuse via the DNS? Yeah, it's also abuse via the DNS, because the DNS itself is used to address to get users to the phishing page. You can detect this with the DNS because you can see that the users will send their request to a DNS resolver that is not the one they should send their requests to. Mitigation and prevention here is difficult, because if a user has a compromised system, let's say he has malware on his system that changed the DNS resolver he sends queries to, it's hard to do something on the DNS level to fix that. So that needs to be fixed on the system level. Is it difficult to say if this is a compromise? No, it is not. If you have access to the system and you can see which resolver he sends his queries to, it's quite easy to tell that this is phishing. The access here is a mixed one, so somehow you need an intrusion to redirect the victims to a different rook DNS resolver, but you also need to have some resources that actually run the DNS server. So this is an example where we have abuse of the DNS and via the DNS, but the mitigation itself is hard to do on the DNS level. That's other with the next example. That's also an example from Switzerland. For about 3 weeks now, we see a phishing against the Federal Customs Department. What is done here is that someone sends email and said, hey, you will receive a parcel, but there's customs due for this parcel and you need to pay it. And they request you to buy a card and send it back to them via email. In the beginning, they did it with a domain of the customs department themselves that was admin.ch, but they implemented a DMARC policy, so that was not longer possible, or at least no longer successful. And so they changed to a different domain name that was schweizzoll.ch. And when we received that, and when we received a takedown request, because we are the registry for .ch, we realized in the beginning this domain name wasn't even registered. That changed, but in the beginning, the attackers used a domain name that was not in the DNS. So it was just a string that was used in the from field of the email to make the victims think that this email comes from the Federal Customs Department. So this was a clear case where we have no abuse of the DNS because the domain name wasn't even registered. It was also no abuse via the DNS because the emails were sent from different emails. It was just the from field in the body of the email that contained the Schweizzoll domain. So it also was not possible to detect it via the DNS. But the interesting thing here, it was possible to mitigate it and even prevent it with the DNS. The way we did it, or let's say someone else did it, so an email company from Switzerland that filters email registered that domain name schweizzoll.ch, and they published SPF and a DMARC policy that says this domain name is not sending any email. And with that, they allowed everyone to detect that this is a spoofed email address and schweizzoll.ch is not sending any invoices to Swiss citizens to pay custom dues. So these were 4 examples, and I think what is interesting here is that you can see that the abuse of the DNS doesn't always mean that you can mitigate and detect and prevent it with the DNS. And in other cases, you have cases where you don't have an abuse of the DNS, but the DNS allows you to mitigate and prevent it. And Jonathan will now give you our findings about a more general view on what was our findings while we discussed all these different incidents from the NISA classification.
Thank you, Michael. So some takeaways from this presentation and the great work that the SIG has done. This has really been terrific work by a lot of people who have contributed. So we want to thank them for that. The DNS is a complex system, obviously, from registration, authoritative, and recursive resolvers that extends to DNS resolvers and configuration and application. Detection, mitigation, and prevention can happen on any of these components. Different actors can detect, mitigate,
it's 17:30,
and prevent DNS abuse better than others for a specific incident. Even incidents of the same type may have different detection, mitigation, and prevention possibilities. Moving on to the next slide. And I'm going to keep this somewhat brief just so we can make sure that we have time to take questions. But you can read the takeaways on the screen. And I guess I would sum it up by saying, abusive content and DNS abuse is not useful or an accurate juxtaposition from the perspective of the global incident response community. Next slide. So we have a lot of further work that we're for the SIG, and we definitely invite everyone who is interested in joining to please express your request so that you can be approved by Michael and myself, the chairs. And if you're a member of FIRST, you can automatically join. But we will be, in some, extending some of the mitigation best practices, and we want to come up with a useful use of examples that responders can work with. We're going to continue to discuss the mapping of the ANISA taxonomy to DNS abuse. And stakeholders will be able to, our vision is that stakeholders will be able to create practical checklists for incident response so that they can understand where their roles begin and where they end. And with that, I'd like to open it to questions that could be fielded by John, Michael, or myself. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you very much. So folks, if you have questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. One of the things as you're going through it, you were talking about the different things that are going on in the industry and the different definitions that are coming up. Is there any cross collaboration that's happening, or is it that group's doing their thing and the DNS SIG is doing their thing? Or is there some overlap between the different parts of the work?
Michael, John, you might have something to say on that. I would say that the work that's been done in the community by other stakeholders is very important and reflects key stakeholders' perspective from their viewpoint. And we hope very much to have cross collaboration with those stakeholders so that the global incident response community's viewpoint can be taken into account. I know there's been great collaboration with ICANN so that to facilitate this work. Michael can actually share with you that we're going to be sharing some of our perspectives in a cross DNS abuse community forum in the near future in that regard. And we very much invite cross collaborative discussions, as the global incident response community is clearly a very important player in this respect, but there are others as well.
Of course. Michael, did you have more to add?
Not really. Jonathan mentioned most of the things. So the DNS SIG is open, and we actually have members in the SIG that are not SIG members, but that come from the DNS industry. And they're very valuable in the discussion because, we need to get all possible input. And we also try to share our findings with other communities like ICANN, like Center, for example. Mm-hmm. And we are open for any collaboration here.
Okay.
And first, and ICANN also signed a MOU, I think 1.5 years ago.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, those discussions happen much better when there's understanding between groups. Absolutely. What do you see kind of as the biggest challenge for your SIG going forward? You kind of listed out some of the work that you're working on. What is kind of the big hill you're trying to climb at this point?
I'd say we're still trying to complete this taxonomy in a reasonable way. It's been interesting because we've, as I think this talk has hit on a number of times, the number of ways that the DNS factors into many, if not most, different types of threat models means that the taxonomy is going to we've had to go through some gymnastics to create categories that accurately capture this. Because if we don't, then I think we're missing a good opportunity to allow different responders the ability to identify where they sit in each one of these different particular threat models. So there is a case for having the DNS operational community or the DNS responders in more of the threat mitigation and prevention tool chain. But again, creating the taxonomy, getting the taxonomy complete with all of the different, we can almost always answer yes for most of these categories, like where is the DNS involved in this particular threat type? And the answer is, the kind of the running joke is the answer is sometimes, and that's actually good because it means that the DNS is a very powerful way to respond to detect and mitigate some of these threats. But the challenge is being able to get the categorizations lined up so that we can create something that policymakers can use going forward.
Okay, excellent. Now we have Carlos Alvarez, who is sitting in here, who has a statement I want to make. I want to make sure I can get him on here. Carlos, are you with us?
Yep, I am.
Excellent. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Sean. I just want to say I've been with the SIG since the very beginning, since before it was formed. And I just want to highlight to all the members that the work that the SIG is doing and will continue to do has a very specific importance. It can help inform policy discussions that happen elsewhere, like within ICANN or within the EU right now, in the conversations that are going on around NIS2, the draft NIS2 directive, and in several other places. Trying to speak as neutrally as I possibly can. Some communities seem to get stuck in discussions about what is and is not DNS abuse. And that discussion has been happening for years, and it's going to continue to happen for years. What the SIG is doing here is skip those endless conversations and going to the bottom of it, nailing it on the head. This is what a security threat looks like when it abuses the DNS or targets the DNS. So just work on it. And that very specific feedback to those policy communities, including the ICANN community, can impact for good the policies and the contracts that then the incident responders can leverage to address abuse. So that's the bridging that the SIG can do by bringing from those two separate worlds, just trying to help from the incident response side, bringing content and feedback and information for the policymakers to make good informed work. Jonathan, and you may add a lot more into that. Thank you.
I want to thank on behalf of the SIG and the presenters here, John, myself, Michael, Carlos, I thank you for being here, and thank you for the support that you're providing in bridging the gap between the incident response community and other stakeholders. That's not an easy feat, and we really do appreciate your support.
Thanks, Jonathan.
And I think the other thing too, that's incredibly important, especially having Carlos, pop in like this, is, as Michael and the others were mentioning, the collaboration between the groups. You see a lot of things in industry where I've got mine and my group's not going to talk to your group because we're doing similar work, and we're not seeing that. We're seeing how this collaboration, albeit sensitive in some respects, though, is kind of aiding each other out. And I think that's, not only just the incredible work that's being done, but the people who are leading the charge and building those relationships and whatnot. And I think that's just very valuable. Michael, did you have more to add? I saw you go off mute.
I think you're completely right, and I think first it's a very good place to have this discussion, because first it's very open. We have the focus of really dealing with incident and we try to reduce the harm. Our goal is not to. We don't have an agenda on something we want to have in a policy. We just want incident responders to be able to have a policy that allows them to respond and to make clear what they can do and what they can't do, and whom to cooperate with. And I think that's one of the goals of the SIG, and I think we're getting closer there. And once we have more clear view on this, we can start reaching out to other communities and raise the voice of incident responders so that we can better fight these phishing, malware, whatever we have there.
Do you have specific communities in mind that you would like to kind of do that reach out to, or there are groups that you're looking to make connections with at this point? So I think it was already mentioned by Jonathan, the policymakers are important, because we now have the discussion that says, oh yes, phishing is DNS abuse, and it's the responsibility of the registries and registrars. And from the incident response, that might be clear for the most cases of phishing we see. But I think once we change the response to these registrations of domain names that are used for phishing, and it's harder for attackers to just register a domain name to do phishing, they will change their tactics. And then we have a policy that is pointless, and we will start with zero and say, okay, now someone else is in charge of stopping phishing. And that's what we try to look ahead and say, okay, what are the tactics and techniques of the attackers, and how can we prevent them, and at what level? And the discussion we see now at ICANN, for example, is really focused on bad guys register domain names and put up phishing sites, and we need to do something about that. Even if that's true, because I think 90% of all phishing is either on a compromised website or on a registered domain name just for that purpose. But I think as soon as we can stop that, they will find another way to continue, and then we have to start again. And I think that's something that we should bring into the discussion.
The DNS is changing quickly in the last year or two, and it's going to change more in the next year or two as well. So I think also expanding some of these definitions of who are the stakeholders to a much more broad set is very important. So as an example, application development is now something that we need to consider in the taxonomy, because we are actually, with encryption, especially where applications now are doing part of this DNS lookups in some cases, and that's expected to expand whether we like it or not. So that being able to create a full definition that includes maybe some future-looking things is important, as I think this as part of the taxonomy, and potentially that also then leads to both policy as well as which other groups are we reaching out to for mitigation, prevention, detection in the future, and including in these discussions are groups that maybe previously have never really participated before. So I think the work is important to create this correctly so that it can look into, the 5-10 year outlook for how DNS is applied to all these different problems.
That makes a lot of sense, because it sounds like otherwise you're just playing whack-a-mole, as you're saying. You close one door, the bad guys will come in the window.
Right.
I think a lot of incident response. It's we're very good at whack-a-mole. We all have our little mallets. So it sounds like another part of this is, as you're trying to expand oh goodness, the definitions and whatnot, is educating those folks who are going to be down the road who maybe aren't even thinking about this, because hey, it's going to be taken care of up here. I don't need to worry about it. Are there also plans to kind of start outreaching to those folks, or is it still too early in the process to start making those connections?
I defer to the chairs.
Michael, correct me if I'm misspeaking or do you disagree? I think we're treading sensitively insofar as our work is in progress. So until we would hate, for example, sir, some of these slides to be misconstrued as like our final say of the SIG. We are still, it's a work in progress. And as Michael said, some of these areas are difficult to decide. So we haven't finalized our work. But in tandem, as our work develops, we would like to have discussions with other stakeholders and improve the quality of our work and contribute to the community in that regard. I think it's important maybe to mention that while we were emphasizing that, for example, we don't see the juxtaposition between content and DNS abuse as particularly helpful or necessarily true to internet architect and engineering principles. We do have a lot in common with some of the other stakeholders in terms of the ability, well, I shouldn't say the ability, but the recognizing the importance of appreciating that there are cross-border issues involved. That's something that incident responders are sensitive to and is important as well to registry operators and registrars. So we probably share more in common than we have different, even though we highlighted some of those differences here. So there's a lot of room for collaboration.
Excellent. Michael, did you have more to add?
Yeah, so I mean, we are not yet in a state where we have a document that is ready. And we also plan to engage the wider FIRST community once we have a document draft ready and ask for review. And then we plan to go outside of the FIRST community. But that doesn't mean that we are not willing to share our work. So in 2 weeks, we're going to present at the ICANN DNS symposium. And whenever we are invited, we will talk about the work we are doing. We don't have answers yet, but we can talk about what we are discussing and where we see issues that need to be discussed with a wider audience, or at least where we think this is something where we shouldn't have a narrow view on the issue just from one stakeholder, but open it up to others.
Excellent. Excellent.
I would add personally, and maybe Michael or John, let me know if you would agree with this. But I also think that what I'm finding interesting about our work is that there's opportunity perhaps to even bridge the gap between constituencies such as the intellectual property constituency and the registry and registrar operators or constituency, insofar as the SIG as a whole has recognized that typo squatting may be a form of DNS abuse, but on the other hand, not all forms of intellectual property infringement constitute DNS abuse. So some of our work may be relevant to multiple communities, and we might be able to help counterbalance some of the concerns by each constituency, recognizing the importance of intellectual property, the importance of customary norms that registry and registrar operators have to have to be sensitive to cross-border jurisdictional issues, just like incident responders do. And I think there's a lot of room for many different constituencies to work together to make the internet a safer place.
Excellent, excellent. Well, do we have any last minute questions? Let me check. We don't have anything in the Q&A. Gentlemen, any last words before we move on? Okay.
So there's still many open questions, and we like to invite everyone who thinks he can contribute to advance with these issues to join the DNS Abuse SIG. And thank you for having us today.
Absolutely. And if I understand correctly, members of FIRST are welcome to join. If people are not members of FIRST, they just need to contact you to see if that's an option for them. Excellent.
Exactly.
Yes, and the SIGs are on the homepage of the FIRST website on the left side. You'll see all the SIGs mentioned. Just go there and click on any of interest, including, of course, the DNS Abuse SIG. If that's of interest to you, we'd love to have you as part of our discussions and to help us develop this important work.
Excellent. And how often do you all meet again?
We have two types of meetings. We have monthly meetings with a formal agenda, and we now have weekly meetings to help finish the work we're doing on our taxonomy.
Excellent.
And it's always Thursday evening at Thursday, 7 p.m. UTC.
Okay.
So depending on your time zone, it's early in the morning or late in the evening.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Jonathan, Michael, John, thank you very much for being with us today. You all are doing some amazing work, and can't wait to see what you get done over the next year. And thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for hosting us.
Thank you so much.
All right. So I'd like to thank everyone. We are going to be a few minutes. We're running a little early today. So give us a few moments and we will get our next talks lined up and see if when we can be ready for that. So please bear with us for just a moment. Thank you. All right, folks, we will be getting started here in about 4 minutes. So please bear with us as we do a little hokey pokey, and we will be right back. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. As you can see, we have some more upcoming SIG updates. Today, we have the DNS Abuse, Academic, Security, and Cyber Insurance SIGs. On May 27th and June 3rd, we also have additional meetings. Same same time, same channel. The work that the SIGs do is incredibly important to FIRST. These are groups of volunteers coming together to make the internet, to make the world safer from a security standpoint. These people come from all over the world, all over industry, government, to work together to create new platforms, new white papers, new standards, new education, new ideas, and then take that information and go out and let folks know about it. So very important work that we're doing here. I think at this point, we are just about ready. Our previous talk, we were running a little early, and I believe our next talk is the academic security folks, and I believe they are about ready. Let's give them a moment to get online. Okay, we're going to take just one more moment, so bear with us. We'll be right back. So again, we'll be back in just a few minutes. We're waiting just for one last panelist to join us. We're running a little early today. As a reminder, we've been doing these SIG updates, and they run through June 3rd. We also have our upcoming conference for FIRST. Very exciting. It's going to be virtual this year, running June 6th through the 9th. If you have interest in attending, please go out to first.org and get signed up. There's no cost to join. There's no cost to attend. And it is open to both obviously members and non-members of FIRST. So please come join us, see all the different things that FIRST is up to as an organization. See, we've got some great talks lined up, some great keynotes, and FIRST is really a very interesting organization. To have over 500 members across the world working together is really rather remarkable. The information you're sitting through right now are the SIG updates. And the great thing about this is if you have an idea for a special interest group, something that's not already being addressed, we have the ability to help you create that. We have membership that are looking to participate. We have ways to support your meetings virtually. And so it's really a great place to come and do some good work. And again, all of these folks are volunteers. This is outside of the normal day job, which I think most of us have pretty hectic normal day jobs anyway. So this is really an incredible thing that people come together to do. We will be getting started here shortly again, and thank you for your patience, but we will be right back. Okay, if we can, I think we've got
Sorry.
That's okay, Lillian, thank you. I think we've got everyone here now. Thank you all for your patience. Give us just a moment while we get our speakers lined up. Lillian, your camera is a little high. I'm seeing just the top half of your face.
Let me check.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you very much. Oops, and my camera's not on at all. The headless voice. There we go.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. Excellent. We'll just give Roderick a moment. I think we've got everyone.
Oh, Roderick.
Here I am.
Excellent. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining us. So this is going to be the update from the academic security SIG, which is very fascinating to me, dealing with some things from the academic world myself recently. So I'm very excited to hear the work that you all are doing and the things that you're discussing and what's top of mind. And with that, I appreciate we're starting a little early, so thank you very much. But please, let's start the show.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Nice to see Roderick here. Okay. Oops. Okay, the slides are correct. Yes?
Not seeing your slides just yet. Are you sharing your screen?
Yes, I'm full screen. Let me check. Oh, sorry.
I have them ready if you want me to share them, Nina. Ah, there we go.
Oh, there we go. All right, there. We're seeing your full slide. We're seeing all your slides, included, not your
Okay.
presentations. There you
No,
go.
it's correct.
Perfect.
Okay, sorry,
Cool.
guys. Yes, here is Roderick and myself. We are the co-chairs of this initiative. Well, one is the difficult of us is to find a schedule, because one is in South Africa and myself is in Brazil, but we are able to work even in different parts of the world. Well, the academic security SIG started, and I think that 2017 when we proposed the SIG. But it really started to operate in 2018. It's a worldwide platform for collaboration of academic and research incident response teams. We realized that there were common difficulties, common challenges for this sector, and it was important to have a space for discussion, to share experiences, to share ideas and knowledge. And in some way, we tried to, I don't know how to envision some strategies or establish some initiatives to improve security in the academic and research sector. Well, the primary target public is national research and educational networks, universities, etc. But the research in education in general. Okay, we will see later that it's possible to have some members that are not necessarily on this that fit on this types of members, but there is a policy that it's possible to allow them to, if they have something to contribute to the SIG or to the SIG mission. Well, we have some first offers us some resources, a mailing list. Today we have almost 60 subscribers from different parts of the world, and we have also a wiki page, and we use this platform, the Zoom platform, to do our virtual meetings. Okay, let me check. Okay, so here's just for the records that we did some face-to-face meetings, especially during the first conferences, the annual conferences, but now they are more virtual. This is just as an example. Talking about the academic the meetings, this is like a timeline in terms of meetings. For 2021, we did already a meeting in February, a virtual SIG meeting, with presentation of members regarding some important and relevant initiatives. And well, currently we are participating on this SIG update, and we have planned 2 additional virtual SIG meetings, one for June It's June 15, and the other one in the second semester. I don't know if you, let me check. It's because, okay. Do you see the whole slide?
I
Yes.
believe so.
Okay, okay, okay. Well, in the, we recently have run a poll to revisit the working groups. This was an idea that we already discussed in the past, but we revisited this and sent out a poll, and there were top 5 most important topics that were indicated by our membership were the cyber threat intelligence. It's because I don't have, I cannot see. I don't know how to move this close, maybe. Okay, sorry. The top 5, cyber threat intelligence. We already know that we have a SIG, a specific SIG with this focus, but the idea here is to work with them, but with the focus on academic and research environments. This was the top one in terms of interest of our membership, SIG membership. And the other one, it was academic research, how to establish services, maturity metrics, etc. We also know that we have the SIG metrics, SIG, and the idea is not to overlap, but work in a collaborative way. Another initiative, the third one, is the cooperation with other similar regional and global initiatives. We also know that there are some initiatives very relevant in GEANT, in RENA-ISAC, or there is a global research, global network security working group, and the idea SIG-ISM, so in GEANT. So the idea is to have, to work with them closely and not to duplicate efforts, of course, but to see what's the, to work with synergy with those initiatives. There are some regional and there are others in a worldwide, they are global. The fourth one, it was always training and awareness continues being is a concern for us. And the idea is to work in probably to have a repository of information to share awareness campaigns, material, etc., and work with other similar initiatives that we have in FIRST also. And the last one, with 67% of interest, pointed at incident response coordination. Now, we perfectly know that we are in a very in an excellent position, because this is our core work, incident response, and but the idea is to see how can we collaborate to work in a more agile and efficient way. Okay, I think, let me see. Well, for all of them, we have already people who raise their hand, and also we have leaders, but only for the academics, research, and effort. We don't have a person. We have people interested in participating on this working group, but not yet a leader. So please, if feel free and on volunteering. For 2021, we have this specific goals. The first one is to find a volunteer, a leader for the academic research and SOX working group. And for those who have already volunteered to lead the working group, we will be working with them as co-chairs. We will be working with them on description, scope, goals, deliverables, and a timeline. Well, when I say that to work with them is just to follow, is to do a follow-up, because they, as we already told them, it's totally up to them, to the leaders, to propose what will be the deliverables and a timeline, if in some 6 months, something like that. We will be presenting, they will be presenting what the goals and deliverables, etc. During the next, it's planned to be on the next Security SIG meeting that it will be held in June 15, as I already told. And another thing, since we already realized that there were there are some SIGs that already approach some of those topics. We will be working with them to see how we can collaborate and avoid overlapping our work. Okay, this is the link of our page. This is an open working group. It means that it's not restricted only to members, first members, but it's restricted to academic and research CSERT. As I already told, non-academic CSERT can be part of our work, of our SIG, but it has to be approved by the chairs, the co-chairs. So it's important for them to, there is a request to join form. Here is the link, and to submit the request with a justification of what is exactly the interest of joining us. So any contact can be made through the academic SIG shares list.first.org. This is what we have to present. Thank you.
Excellent.
Free, if you want to add or complete anything, please.
No, I think you've done a great job. Well done. I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A.
Nope, but I might have a couple questions for y'all. So, you know, I think this is very interesting. I know the academic SIG is bringing a perspective that is missing in a lot of the SIGs. You know, it's even in my early days in incident response, we thought about, you know, academic submissions differently than we did, you know, external researchers. It was kind of a separate category, you know. I think bringing that perspective into the different SIGs is incredibly important. How are you connecting with the other SIGs to make sure that you can help with those synergies that you were mentioning? Are you, you know, do you have like a presentation that you're taking around to the other SIGs or to other groups to kind of let them know that you're available, what we're working on, and such?
Sean, we haven't done much of that yet. We've tried to, I would say, revive the SIG. We lost a bit of momentum over the last 2 years. And so this initiative to establish working groups with focus areas is, part of that effort. And we realized that the topics of interest, especially ones like CTI, there are already groups on that. So it's saying, looking at what they're doing and where does it make sense for us to collaborate and not to duplicate effort. So we're still going to initiate those efforts, led by the leaders for the specific working groups and coordinated by ourselves. We did. I joined the metrics SIG last year, for example, when I was looking at metrics for academic CSIRTs, and to say, okay, what some of the more traditional metrics don't necessarily make sense to us. But we haven't actively, let's say, engaged with them yet, and with other SIGs. So that's a new initiative, but something that we realize, would make a lot of sense for us, especially considering the areas of interest.
No, I think that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And it's hard. And I know especially when I think for a lot of the SIGs, it's like having that physical meeting where everybody's kind of, rolling about, even though a lot of us can't attend the physical meetings very often. You get that vibe, you get the energy, and get more members coming on board. And it's been a little difficult this year with or last two meetings anyway being virtual. Have you been able to get other folks to join? I know we've got a call out. Most of the SIGs are accepting new members. There's a lot of great work to be done. Are there any kinds of specific volunteers you're looking for, or just kind of, what kind of help are you looking to get other than a leader? It sounds like.
Sure. We definitely want to encourage other first members, but even people that are not first members but part of an academic CSIRT in R&E, even research infrastructure, science infrastructure, etc., to reach out to us to see how it makes sense for them to participate. Everybody is resource constrained, and arguably more so now than what we were a year and a half ago. But we definitely want to encourage more members. We have a very strong biased participation from the Europe region, from the EU region. And I think we only have one, maybe two active members from the US now, and only a handful in South America, and practically none from the Asia Pacific regions. So it would really be good to have more representation. But we're also aware that the first team membership for academic CSIRTs has a similar bias in any case. So maybe that's something that we need to look to at a broader first level, to try and get more academic teams from those underrepresented regions into first and then into the SIG. And we can perhaps do that as a combined effort. So yeah, but please, this is a call for anybody interested. Reach out to us and let's see how we can make it work. And one of the intentions under that academic CSIRTs and SOC is to actually help establish and mature academic CSIRTs. So if somebody is new at this and wants to know where to start, they can reach out to us, or if they are an academic cert pursuing first membership, they can reach out to us. Some of us have recently been through the journey, and we can definitely help with that, even if it's just to sponsor them or something.
Excellent. One of the questions I have, because I think a lot of folks, when we think academic, we're thinking like the academic researchers who are working on their PhD papers and finding vulnerabilities or doing different kinds of research. Does the academic SIG also have members from like the PhD programs, or is it just specifically for the certs themselves, the academic certs themselves?
Nina, do you know?
I think that we have only one. To tell you the truth, I don't remember.
Okay. I just wasn't sure if that collaboration is helpful or if that's not at this point.
So we have mostly information security officers and some CSIRT members, analysts and such. But a lot of the members of the group are associated with an academic cert, but not a member of the cert team directly, but they're within the information security group of their organization.
Okay.
But in terms of research and things that we have recently received a request, but that's something fairly new. So yeah, that understanding of the association, I don't think is as applicable to this SIG in its current form.
Nope, that's
it's mainly for people working with or related to actual CSIRTs, professionals. Then.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you all very much, Lily and Roderick. Appreciate your time zone differences and joining us today, whatever morning, afternoon, middle of the night. You all are doing some really good stuff and thinking about things and attacking a problem from an angle. I think that it definitely needs some help. I know of others who, in dealing with universities and whatnot, that sometimes that's the certs there are even more under resourced than perhaps even global and other certs. So thank you for the work you're doing. And for those of you out there, please, if you have interest in this, if you're from an academic cert, please reach out and come join. Absolutely. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So with that, we are going to line up our next speakers. We are running about 10, 12 minutes early here, which sometimes happens when you're on live event. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. For those of you just joining, this is the first SIG update. We're going through and giving all of our SIGs an opportunity to kind of talk about their work they're doing and talk about the help they're looking for. Most of our SIGs are accepting new members, and many of the SIGs, you're not required to be a member of FIRST to participate. So if you go out to first.org and you look on the left-hand column, you'll see all the different SIG work that's going on. Definitely click on there and see if there's something you're interested in, and please reach out. We need eyes. We need eyes from all over the world to make these initiatives and papers and education and frameworks and all of the different work that's going on to be more valuable. And we're kind of loading up the next folks. So the next talk is going to be the cyber insurance SIG. I was, as the SIG liaison to the board, I got to actually sit in on most of these SIGs meetings just to kind of familiarize myself with the members and the work they're doing and see what we could do to support them. As a reminder, these are all volunteers. These are folks doing this work outside their normal day job, contributing to the industry, to the community. And the cyber insurance SIG actually, it was fascinating. I had a little background in insurance at one point, and just seeing the different problems and the different parts of the industry they're bringing together to work on problems was just absolutely fascinating. I think I overstayed my time limit just to listen to them chat. With that, I think we have the folks on. Let's see. Yes, I believe we have the gentleman. Good morning, good afternoon.
Hi, Sean. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today, Michael?
Perfectly fine, thanks.
Are you all ready to present?
Yes, I am. I will share my screen.
Excellent. For those of you joining us, just a reminder, if you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom, and I will be asking the gentleman the questions towards the end of their talk. And with that, we see your screen, but we see all the slides, not the presentation. There you go. Excellent. With that, I will leave it to you, gentlemen. Please go on.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for introduction and for setting the stage quite high. So what we want to present to the audience and to you all today is what we did within the cyber insurance SIG the last year, and with this also giving you the chance to maybe better understand what the SIG is all about, and then of course also create some interest for all of you to join and to discuss the topics with us. With this being said, just diving into the main topics of the last year or the last 1.5. Of course, there's the most important topic that we try to address within the SIG is the interface and the exchange between the CSIRT community and then especially the cyber insurance and also reinsurance folks and companies to really have an open exchange to discuss different topics they are facing in the day-to-day world. And that's really important because we've seen throughout the last 2 or 3 years that those two worlds are getting closer and closer, and also the interaction between those two worlds is getting more heavily. Therefore, we really try to bring those together, those two worlds, and sometimes we also try to fire up some discussions and some exchange by inviting external speakers for dedicated webinars to our regular meetings. And this is something I will give you a short glimpse into on one of the next slides. When looking at the cyber insurance topic, I would say we had two main issues or two main discussion groups or points during the last year. The first one was regarding the language gap that we see still between the insurance and the security industry. And that's also something I will dive into on one of the later slides. And the second one was a quite interesting discussion we got from someone really from outside perspective. So neither the CSIRT side nor the cyber insurance side, but a researcher that was looking into, aren't there some kind of conflicting interests when it comes to incident response? But when looking at the CSIRT side or the victim side, so to say, and the insurance side. And this really led to a lot of discussions within the group. And then last but not least, metrics is also something that we are really interested about. Looking at data, trying to quantify cyber risk, and also there try to have an exchange between the insurance and the CSIRT side. I know that this topic has somewhat taken a backseat during the last year, but it's definitely something that we want to discuss in the future more heavily.
Maybe this is a good time to say something to you about the makeup of our membership. So we have insurance companies, as you would expect, who sell cyber insurance products. We also have a few who don't necessarily sell cyber insurance products, but are considering doing so. And obviously that's the sort of core of the group. And then we have some of the reinsurers who are backing some of those insurance companies, and they often have different interests than some of the cyber insurers, and they want to vet some of the metrics and some of the methods that those cyber insurers are using. And of course, we have the incident response teams that FIRST is typically made up of, and we actually would love more of their participation and comments in the group for a variety of different reasons. But then we also have academics who are working on, can you insure DDoS, or can you insure breach, or can you insure ransomware? What would the mathematics of that look like? What would the economics of that look like? Are there any conflicts of interest? And those researchers kind of tend to cycle through, and you'll see them in some of our webinars. Or they might be an expert on a particular type of cybercrime, and they want to reach out to the insurers and to the incident response teams at the same time. So that's typically what our membership looks like at the moment. But we also have some modeling companies who do cyber risk modeling for the insurance industry, who come to look for different sources of data and to present their work and their ideas. So yeah, just a rough overview of who we are already and the kinds of people that enjoy spending time with us.
Thanks a lot, Aaron. Yeah, as promised, giving you a short glimpse what we did besides the, let's say, the normal discussions that we are doing through the mailing list and also through the regular meetings. In August, we had a quite open cyber insurance Ask Me Anything, where we discussed a lot and also went heavily over time. But that again showed us that it's really important to have the discussion between the CSIRTs and the insurance world, because there are a lot of open and unanswered questions or topics that the other side is always interested in. Then in October, we had an interesting introduction about the current developments on the cyber war exclusions. That's one of the topics, I think, since the NotPetya incidents and some insurers not willing to pay under dedicated policies, that is in the media since then. And also the insurance market is developing there and trying to make this exclusion more precise, so that also the insured really knows in which cases this exclusion kicks in, and not has the fear that anytime there is a larger loss or a larger incident, the insurer will come and will claim that exclusion. Then I would say the presentation we had in January and in May, so a couple of days ago, they more or less tackle the same topic. One from the research side, the academia, and the other more from being a CSIRT or an incident responder, but in the same environment. It was a discussion about, isn't there maybe a kind of conflict of interests between the victim, so the policyholder, and the insurance when it comes to incident response, how the response should look like, what the main focus is, and also in deciding which service provider to use for the incident response itself. And those two presentations and then also the discussions that followed those really showed that this is a very important topic, and that we really need to focus a bit more on that one. And then, as mentioned, the topic of the language gap. That's something that we have seen heavily, that we also started to discuss in 2019 when the SIG started, more or less. And throughout 2020, we created a initial draft for paper that tries to show this conflicting, this language gap. And that was something we presented in April to the metric SIG, and again got there a lot of feedback that really helped us to drive the paper to the next level.
I think it's worth expanding a little bit on that language gap too, and that it exists both within the policies of insurance, like as someone who wants to buy cyber insurance, how do I read a policy? And Michael's done excellent work with the working group, like answering that question, and we will continue to be, making that evidence clear to other people or discussing with other people. So if your SIG wants a presentation on that, I would say get in touch with Michael and I and have a discussion around it. But it's not just the language within the policies, it's also the language between insurers and incident responders when they're doing incident response. So, what does an insurer mean by breach as opposed to what an incident responder means by breach? And those differences are bigger than you might expect. And in fact, yeah, you're going to expand on that here.
You already explained most of what I wanted to tease in here.
All right, I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, all fine. Yeah, as Aaron mentioned, I guess the biggest issue here is really the wording that is used, and often a kind of a misunderstanding. When the IT security folks are talking about the contributor system, they normally all see the same systems covered under this term. They have pretty concrete understanding what it is. But if you then look at some of the policies, it can differ, and this can be a huge impact in the end. I don't want to talk about if operational technology, so your ICS and SCADA systems, are covered when someone in the policy is talking about a computer system. That's a whole different level. But alone the fact, is it a leased system? Is it your own? Is it on-site? Is it off-site? This can make a huge difference when looking at the policies itself. And then the topic of a breach that Aaron just mentioned, that's sometimes even the start for the discussion and the misunderstanding, because it can be that a breach is clearly defined for you on the CSIRT side or in the policyholder side. But for an insurer, this can mean something totally different. And therefore, it's on the one hand side really important to very precisely read the policies and get a clear understanding. And this, in best case, before you need the policy and the incident has happened. But on the other side, and that's what we are trying to tackle currently, to make this source for the misunderstandings more obvious, more transparent, and then also with this help to harmonize let's say the two worlds, so that if they use terms, they at least know that somebody else understands it a bit different. And hopefully with this driving forward, we would really help the whole market, because the worst thing that can happen is in the middle of an incident, or even if the incident is in the remediation phase, to then notice that it's not covered under the insurance because one of the few words in there you misunderstood, and now you're there without the support of the insurer.
I think it's worth saying too, you've bundled this into a single slide, but the presentation you gave to the metrics group is like 45 minutes long, expanding on a variety of different topics. So, while this might seem a little dry and collegiate, it's actually very practical and useful information. And I encourage you to reach out to Michael and maybe see about, having a longer discussion on the topic if you're interested, either on another SIG to SIG basis, or even just in small groups within FIRST.
I would be more than happy to give you a deeper look into the paper and the topic at all, and to have the discussion with all of you on this.
So, do you want to start here, or is this sensitive for you and I'll take over? You want me to?
I would say it's the better slide for you to go in, and I will add if there's something.
We added this slide on behalf of firsties getting in touch with us, saying what's going on, and of course there's going to be perennial questions about what is my insurance policy and what doesn't. What does it cover? What does it not cover? How are things changing? What am I going to have to do next year? Why are the prices changing? And to be honest, we try to answer those questions in a broad way. You do have to understand that there are a couple of reasons it's not easy to answer those questions. Certainly, if you come to the SIG, the insurance industry doesn't allow them to necessarily discuss all their pricing for sensitivity reasons and anti-competition rules. So, we can't always answer questions about pricing that are to the point, but we can answer them generally speaking. And some of the members who are not part of insurance companies can answer that a little more clearly. But we did think that it was important to try and explain, right? And the gist of it is ransomware is a big deal. I think we all know that. We spent a lot of time within the SIG discussing ransomware from a variety of standpoints, from the ethics of paying ransoms to the quantification of losses. And we have the lawyer's point of view, and the quant's point of view, and the ethics point of view, and the SIG's point of view, and the CERT's point of view, and all of that's very important. But the long and short is that there are more incidents. I personally would argue that we had enough data on the ransomware issue to understand that the price of ransoms was going to go up. And we generally expect that the price of ransoms is less than the price of losses. And therefore, there will be a lot of sublimits in this year's policies. Essentially, what's happening is there's actuarial uncertainty around this problem. And consequently, the amount of capital that can go into reinsurance and insurance is being constrained, and law of supply and demand, you will have less coverage for a lot of people. And so there will be sublimits in this year's policies, probably for ransomware specifically, but also potentially for other things. You will see prices go up all across the industry, even for renewals of policies. That may be different depending on the size of your organization and your ability to negotiate, but broadly speaking, these are the trends. The exclusions are getting more and more relevant and trickier to understand, and you'll have to read carefully through some of the details. Some insurers will pay the ransom. The easy way to say this is some will, some won't, some do, some don't. But I would not assume that it would be covered under every policy. In some jurisdictions, it may not be legal to cover the ransom. We certainly have discussions about the ethics, and we welcome those further discussions within the SIG. It may be harder and harder for you to even find coverage, and you may be asked to do things by your insurer or demonstrate some standards or compliance. What those things will be is obviously individual to the individual insurers, but broadly speaking, expect to have to do more to get your insurance in the coming years. And one of the other things we've been discussing is to ask if the DFIR providers cover, that are approved within your policy are first members. That certainly helps first, but it also helps you get to know whether or not this is an organization that has some vetting and accreditation. But also, we're discussing within the SIG processes for remediation and discussion between incident responders and insurers. So these are all things that you can do in a practical sense. This is not usually what we discuss, but we understand that it's what many of the first members are curious about and want to know when they come to see the SIG. So I imagine we'll be doing these updates, or you will be doing these updates in the future, Mike.
And I'm quite sure there will be more discussions going on regarding what's the right DFIR provider, and also, as we've seen through the last couple of weeks, the price discussion and risk assessment discussions from the insurance industry will also be something of more interest for much more current first members.
Yeah. But I'm glad I have a chance to say, like, what we don't want is for you to walk into the SIG and say, what price can you give me on your son on cyber insurance this year, right? There's like 20 reasons that question can't be answered in that SIG. But now you at least understand a few of them. First of all, we don't speak for all the insurers. Secondly, price fixing, we can't sit and discuss that inside that SIG, but we can tell you broadly whether it's going to go up or down and why, and how to negotiate a little bit. So, all right, next slide. So, yeah, I'll start off on this one, but feel free to step in a few points, Michael. So this conflicts of interest, I think it happens both at a kind of intellectual level, in the sense that sometimes an insurer sends an incident responder to solve an incident and save them money. Sometimes they send an incident responder to gather forensics and maybe demonstrate that a client has been remiss in some way. It's not always that happens, but it does happen sometimes. And this is where these kind of conflicts of interest occur. There's also a tendency of lawyers to kind of manage the incident response and do the kind of breach coaching approach. Sometimes that works out well. Sometimes that ends up causing issues and inflating some of the costs or complicating some of the decisions. And that's very much what we spend a lot of time discussing in the SIG. So, if you work for the insurer, you might be gathering evidence of non-compliance. If you're working for the insured, you might be gathering evidence that causes conflicts with the insurer's incident response. Hopefully this is smoother in the future, and we're discussing both how could that discussion go better live during an incident and during the insurer's coverage of the incident, but also like how could we remediate some of those events afterwards through first discussions and improve that and the standards. Sometimes that's the techniques and tools are not standardized between the teams, and so the use of this tool can end up causing a problem on this system, but not on this system. There's also a tendency towards remote incident response, especially during COVID, and that can complicate some things. So we're still discussing that, and we're sort of playing around with the idea at the moment of a working group to discuss some of the standards of the incident responders. But generally speaking, we'd like to see that the incident responders are members of TFC CERT or FIRST, because we think that's kind of independent and relatively good start to that dialogue. So if you're interested in those topics, either from the point of view of an insurer or reinsurer or from an incident responder, we'd like to hear from you, and we'd like you to come along and talk to us about some of those issues. So if you're an incident response team that has done a little bit of work for insurers, we'd like to hear your stories, like what went well, what could the insurers do better when they're employing you. You get the idea. So anything you want to add?
No, I think that the last point you mentioned, that's one of the most important ones for all sides. I think it's really important to get some case studies, some lessons learned from companies that dealt with incidents where also the insurer was involved, to really better understand, okay, what went well and where are the points to improve. And this helps especially, or at least in most of the cases, it helps especially the insurer to understand also where he has to focus on in improving the services and the policy itself. So as Aaron mentioned, if you have been part of an incident investigation where the insurer was also part and have some stories to tell, we are more than happy if you would come to the SIG and discuss it there with us.
And just to clarify a little bit of that point, I've taught the insurers over the last 2 years, the TLP, traffic light protocol, so they are aware, and you can come and discuss some things with some level of confidentiality. We do publish our webinars, if it's okay to do so, but we can even leave out some part of that commentary during a webinar, or we can have a private discussion under kind of Chatham House TLP Red kind of approach. So hopefully you have the permission of everyone to share all the information, but you can even sort of share anecdotal information and expect it to be kept private in the normal sort of first manner. So next slide.
So for the rest of 2021, and then let's say the next half of the year until there's the next SIG update round, we want definitely to go on with our discussion paper on the language gap topic. We want to, on the one hand side, let's say, release it to the broader first community. The metrics SIG was, so to say, our pilot case, and that went very well. So we are really happy to be able to share it to a broader audience. And if you're SIG or a group of you wants to get an insight or a discussion there, please really feel free to get in contact with me or the SIG itself for that introduction.
Worth mentioning at this point too, Michael, both you and I share something that is probably important to first members, and that's that we were doing incident response before we were really involved in insurance in some way. So Michael was previously part of Siemens, and I've been around the CERT community for many years. I hope many of you know me from other work, but recently I joined an insurer as well as a CTO. So we kind of bridge that gap a little, but we expect more and more of you will be doing sort of similar things in the future. So I consider myself a first member and an incident responder first, and kind of insurer second, and hopefully that means we can translate things relatively well to the rest of the group. So did you cover the war exclusions? And
the war exclusion is something we had on the slide already in the last update. There was the introduction on the developments from the insurance side that happened in October last year from Cyrus. But I guess we still wanted to tackle this topic by discussing it from a more independent perspective, because currently I feel on the market and the media, you have the both of the extremes. You have the insurer that is still heavily behind that exclusion, and you have the policy holders and the market that wants to get rid of it because they don't want to see it in the policies any longer. And there we still think that maybe throughout the SIG we could come up with a opinion paper to show, okay, what's the good side, what's the bad side on it, and where to really take care if you see this exclusion in one of the policies.
And I really, I founded the group almost 2 years ago. I think it was in Edinburgh that we first met. And, I foresaw even at that time that there was going to be an increased friction and discussions between these groups. And so we're hoping that this group kind of creates a conduit for that, and less friction and more open and frank discussion. And then everybody learns from that process, which I think is really interesting. So this year I'll step down as a chair of the SIG in September. Michael will take over. He's been a co-chair of mine for almost 1.5 years or something now, I think. And so, I guess as I'm stepping down, I'm thinking about other people that might want to be a co-chair and might have something to say. I think, it's not necessarily for me to decide for the entire group, but I kind of wish that there would always be like an alternation between an insurer, reinsurer, and an incident responder, so that we would have that continual dialogue. So if you're an incident responder or an academic interested in this kind of topic, it might be good to have you come along and become a co-chair and support Michael. We need people with passion and energy that keep the community discussing things. And I'll still be an active member of the SIG, but I'm looking forward to stepping down and using some time to do other things. I also think it's important that groups change leadership regularly. so that they sustain themselves and don't rely entirely on one person's energy. So hats off to you, Michael. I'll still be in the background, but looking forward to just being a member for a while.
Yeah, we'll definitely miss you in the position of the chair. You had the right feeling when to break the silence in the group and which topic to shoot into the broader audience to again start a discussion. I will do my very best to follow up on this. But as you mentioned, I think the kind of rotation, that's something that's really helpful for the group to also maybe get new ideas into the SIG, to look at things from a different angle. And therefore I would also really like to emphasize if there's someone from the incident response community that wants to be a co-chair and lead the SIG for the next 1.5 to 2 years together with me. We are more than happy to discuss and to join forces there.
So with that, any questions?
Excellent, excellent presentation, guys. Thank you very, very much. I had, as you were talking through it, I had two thoughts. One, where you mentioned that, you know, people are coming into the SIG and, you know, who can give me a better quote on this insurance policy, or why is my insurer saying that? And that's not the premise for this SIG. There are some very good discussions that happen, but just kind of reminded me of, you know, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer kind of thing. I'm an insurer, but I'm not your insurer. Your you know, mileage may vary. I thought that was great. The one thing I would take back though is you say it's dry, and I would imagine, yes, if someone is just thinking insurance and whatnot, oh my goodness, you know, actuaries and insurance. And I would disagree. I will say that sitting in on your SIG, I was actually very excited. I found the discussion riveting. There was a lot of good back and forth, a lot of great opinions, and so I wouldn't characterize it as dry at all. And I think to take a topic that some would consider dry and make it vital and interesting is definitely hats off to the SIG chairs who do such a great job of driving the conversation and the work. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Sean.
Excellent. With that, we are going to close out today's SIG. I would like to thank the attendees who joined us for this show today, and those of you who may be watching from YouTube or watching at a later time. We will be back next week. As I like to say, same bat time, same bat channel. We are going to be having the metric SIG, the first membership committee update, and then we have a closed SIG update for the Threat Intelligence Coalition. That SIG will require a separate registration, so please go out to the first.org website if you're interested. You can see the times and dates. We have 2 more meetings of SIG updates. And as a reminder, we also have our upcoming virtual conference June 6th through the 9th. We hope that you can join us. And with that, I'd like to thank all the SIG chairs who presented today and all of those who've watched and our support in the back. And thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.